The scripture this morning comes from Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I
Good morning, church. Good morning. It is good to see all of you here this morning. This is a special day for us here at Centerville. We're celebrating our high school graduates today. We got a couple ladies next door working hard to make sure all the food is ready for us. If you're visiting with us this morning, on top of us just being grateful that you're here to worship with us, we invite you to come join us for that. You know, there's no better way to get to know you or for you to get to know us than eating together over a free lunch, right? So please come and join us for that and help us celebrate our seniors. I enjoyed Rich's comments last Sunday about mountaintop experiences. If you remember that. If you weren't here, you missed a really good talk. We'll talk about plateaus next week, but I figured we'd at least kind of, there's got to be a little bit of a balance to this, right? If you're going to talk about mountaintops, you should talk about valleys as well. There's a group exercise that I do with my teenagers on a pretty regular basis, whether it was starting up with a class or we're doing something like an event. A lot of times I ask for them to share their peaks and valleys, okay? This idea that share with me one thing that happened for you good this week, a peak, and one thing that happened bad this week, a valley. And I do that for a variety of reasons. For one, to grow the intimacy of the group. We hope that they would, bond over shared interest or shared problems, that they would be praying for one another, etc. But one of the things that I've consistently seen over the years is that for about every one peak I get about 3 or 4 valleys. And I don't think that's limited or constrained to just our young people. We all find ourselves going through valleys in life. We find ourselves going through valleys week in and week out. Sometimes they're small, so they're more of like a ditch than a valley, right? Sometimes they're really big. It's like you're walking in the belly of the Grand Canyon. Sometimes they're personal, sometimes they're communal, sometimes they're physical, sometimes they're emotional or mental. We all have these valleys in our lives. We all go through these dark and hard times. And what I think is most sad in this topic is that we as the church, sometimes we pretend like we can't have valleys. Have you experienced this? I think that's horrible because, the church should be the one place where we can open up about our hardships. I really appreciate our ladies class. I appreciate the work that Roxanne has done. I appreciate Lisa teaching right now because the topic that they're going through in the ladies class on Tuesday nights right now is masquerade. This idea that sometimes we put on these masks and we hide our real problems and we hide what's really going on and act like everything's fine. When a lot of times it's not, is it? We like I said, we go through this. And that's not pretending like everything is fine is not a healthy or a biblical answer even at the same time. The Bible is filled with examples of men of faith and women of faith who experience some pretty low lows. I just thinking about the examples that Rich gave us of the mountaintop people from last week, just thinking about those God, Israel's God, comes out truly triumphant. And then after this happens, the queen, who is a Baal follower, threatens Elijah. And so he instantly goes and hides in the wilderness afraid, crying out to God that he wishes God would let him die. Already, just after such a powerful moment, he just already wants to die because he feels like he's alone and he feels like a failure. Nobody is immune to valleys. So the question becomes then, what do we do in these moments? What is the attitude or what is the action that we as Christians should take when we go through these dark times and these valleys? I want us to look at a passage where God's speaking to a people that are going through a really dark chapter in their history. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, go ahead and turn with me over to Jeremiah chapter 29. Jeremiah chapter 29, and while you're turning there, a civil split. And they kind of split themselves into two nations. The northern kingdom was evil a lot earlier on, so God sent Assyria to do something to them. And now, as Isaiah predicted, and now as you see in Jeremiah, it's happening to the southern nation as well. And so this time it's Babylon. Babylon comes in, takes over the nation, the empire of Assyria, and then also stretches down to capture the southern kingdom. And so they're punished in this way. And their towns are sacked. Their fighters, they're killed, and most of them are captured and taken away from their home and enslaved to be servants and to be slaves in a foreign land. They were taken out of their homeland, a large majority of them, and taken them into what we refer to as exile. So this is quite literally one of maybe the single most darkest chapter, maybe the darkest, deepest valley that Israel has ever been in. And outside of Jeremiah or Isaiah, who prophesies about this, we even have other books that talk about this time because it's such a big event for them. They don't just leave it hanging. There's one book in particular that comes to mind. Anybody want to guess what that is? That references this Babylonian exile? The Book of Lamentations, which is just a book full of laments. If we named it today, we'd call it the really sad poetry book. Okay, it's a whole book of them crying out and just speaking, giving words to their distress in this event they're going to. It's not a small ordeal. And Jeremiah, we have even nicknamed him the weeping prophet in modern days because of the experiences and the hardships that he has to go through. Let me just give a side note to that. Service to God is not all smiles. Some of you who have spent your life as Christians, you recognize that. Service to God is not all smiles. If you look through the Bible, there are plenty of times where God himself is pushed to anger and to sadness. And if we're devoted and committed to God's will and to following him, we're going to experience those emotions as well. Now, with that said, I truly believe that living a Christian lifestyle gives us the most abundant and full life possible and brings us the most joy. But Jeremiah, for example, he sees Israel. He sees the evil that's going on. He knows the path that they're taking, and it breaks his heart. If we're willing to look through the eyes of God into our world, there's going to be times when we're just driven to our knees in sadness. There's not that there's not joy there is, but there's heartbreak in the service of God. But that's just a side note. So with Israel, their exile, this valley we were talking about, it was a result of their choices. They disobeyed, they mocked, and they flat out ignored God to a point where they found themselves in trouble because of it. Now sometimes our valleys, they're just by chance, aren't they? When you get laid off of work because your company's downsizing, or when you have a close family member who passes away, there's not much control we have over that. Those are deep, dark valleys, but they're valleys by chance. And at the same time, sometimes, if we're honest with ourselves, we have valleys that are a result of our actions, don't we? When we've used and abused people to a point where we found ourselves all alone because they don't want to be around us anymore. Or when you've seeked instant gratification over and over and over again to the point where you're hooked on something that you can never truly shake. If we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we, like Israel, we dig our own valleys. And I think recognizing that is going to be the first step into finding this hope that we're talking about today. So ultimately, God has a message for these people in pain, and so that's where Jeremiah 29 comes in. If you'll read with me, starting in verse 4, Jeremiah 29, verse 4. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they... As you go from peak to peak and we're driving along, it's in those valleys that you really find some of the most stunning beauty. That's where the deer are. That's where the wild animals are. That's where the wild flowers are. That's not why you go, and that's not the awe-inspiring sightseeing that you see right away, but God still provides beauty in the valley. Does that make sense? If we can focus on what's going right, it'll help us persevere through the valley. And I choose the word persevere very intentionally. There's something I want us to understand is that we can learn just as much in the valley as we can on the mountaintop. There is just as much to learn in the valley as on the mountaintop. One of my favorite scriptures here is the beginning of James chapter 1. Just in the very beginning of his letter, he opens up, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many." We are made more whole, if you will, when we go through the valley, when we journey through the valleys. Growth is found in perseverance. It's not found in escape. We want escape, but growth isn't found in escape. It's found in perseverance. This is a great verse. I thought it was Delaney's favorite verse. She told me yesterday that it wasn't. But it's a lot of people's favorite verse. I've come across this a lot. And it should be. Man, what a powerful statement. Even before it, talking about, I will fulfill my good promise to bring you back. There's a lot that's beautiful here. But at the same time, I want to caution us on how we use this text, okay? Sometimes we use this like a prescription, okay? Take 2 Jeremiah 29:11s and call me in the morning. Maybe you'll feel better. I know it's funny, but when we do this, when we kind of use it as a quick fix, we end up sounding more like those false prophets than we do Jeremiah, don't we? It's not a quick fix. It's not. That's not what it's for. We had a family friend whose son was pretty sick, and people continued to come to this verse actually specifically to tell him, "Oh, it's going to be okay. God is going to make him better anytime now. He wants good for you. He wants the future." Well, he didn't. And the conclusion of the parent there was that God must not be real because he didn't have a plan for my future, at least not in this area. We forget that this verse, 29:11, was written to people in exile. They were devastated, they were hurt, they were suffering, and God told them that it was going to be lasting for another 70 years. Most of them weren't going to live another 70 years, were they? I don't know what the life expectancy was. I'm not even going to try to guess the time period BC when this is. I should know, but I don't know what the time period was, in their lifetime. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't have a hope and they couldn't have a future in that same sense. Just because they couldn't experience the conclusion of that promise doesn't mean they couldn't have a hope or a future. An interesting fact here, this kind of gets to me, is the you, in 29:11, the you, it's plural. It's the Hebrew y'all, okay? I really wish we had Bible translations with y'all because that would just be so much helpful. Because it's like, we have, every other language has a plural you except for us. We do. We have y'all. So anyway, for I know the plans I have for y'all, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper y'all and to give y'all a hope and a future. Okay? This promise, it's more about the forest than it is about the trees. Okay? It's more about the forest than it is about the trees. Does that mean that God doesn't have a plan for you specifically? Does that mean God doesn't have a future for you specifically in mind? That's not what I'm saying, because I believe that he does. But we can't use this verse as a quick fix for people, because it means so much more than that. It's so much better than what we bring it down to be. What we've done with Jeremiah 29:11 is we've made it into a chicken nugget. Yep. I'm about to say, like, you guys look a little comfortable with it. Okay. We turn it into a chicken nugget. It's a small morsel. It's a small morsel that tastes really good, yeah, and it's pleasing, but it looks nothing like what the original looks like, does it? You know, it doesn't look anything like the original. When we cut this verse out of its context, God is going to offer us some immediate relief. I think it's helpful to think that. But when that doesn't happen, what are we left with? If we kind of use this verse to say, oh, God's going to offer you some immediate relief, and it doesn't happen, what are we left with? You know, isn't it better to know that God is present with Jesus gives us a similar message here in John chapter 16 and verse 33. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. And I like the way also that the Christian artist Johnny MacPowell puts it when he wrote, even though the journey is long and I know the road is hard, the one who's gone before me, he will help me carry on. After all that I've been through, now I realize the truth. To seek God. God is begging, come and find me. When you find him, it doesn't mean he's going to flip on all the lights at once. But I guarantee you he's carrying a lantern. And that's exactly what we need in those dark times. God cares about your valley. God has joined you in your suffering. He has a plan to bring you out. Our God has promised to raise us from the valley to the mountaintop. And he promised to raise us to the mountain of Zion. And he's evidence that where the valley's going to hit you. You know, for me, it was getting to college, taking that first test, bombing it, and realizing that I was going to be able to coast through college like I did high school. But when that day comes, graduates, just remember that God is present with you in your suffering, and that you will become stronger for having gone through it. And keep your eyes open for that next mountaintop as you continue to push through the journey, because you know where your eternal destination lies. You know where that journey ends. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. If we can help you in any way this morning, whether that's to bring you out of the valley through baptism for the first time or just to help you